It was 4 a.m. when the neighborhood still rested under the heavy silence of night. The sky outside dark with only a few faint stars shining above. And inside his home, Michael was wide awake, sipping on a glass of water because sleep had escaped him after hours of struggling with office files, while his teenage son David had just gone to bed an hour earlier, after pushing himself to finish a big school project that was due in the morning. His desk lamp still glowing faintly in his room, papers scattered everywhere showing how hard he had worked, and for a moment Michael thought the house would finally be quiet until the sound of a loud, sharp knock shattered the stillness and sent a jolt through him, a knock that was not once but repeated again and again with an impatient rhythm, not the kind of knock that signals danger, but the kind that demands attention immediately, and he wondered who could possibly need something at this hour. So when he carefully peeked through the curtains, his tired eyes widened, because standing by the pool gate was Karen, the neighbor who was known by everyone in the community not for kindness but for always wanting to be the star of every HOA meeting. A woman who never missed a chance to remind others how much she cared about appearances. And there she was pacing in her robe with her phone in one hand, her other hand slamming against the gate as though the world depended on it, her voice soon ringing across the yard as she shouted, "Michael! David, open the pool gate right now!" And the words felt both strange and heavy in the middle of the night, making Michael shake his head in disbelief because surely no one had the right to demand such a thing at such an hour. Yet Karen's face was firm with urgency, and with a sigh Michael stepped outside to ask her what this was about. His voice lowered so as not to wake David. "Karen, do you know it's 4 in the morning? Why are you yelling like this?" But Karen only crossed her arms, her impatience written all over her, and she snapped back without hesitation. "The HOA officials are coming early today, and I promised them I would show them the pool. I told them everything would be perfect, and I need that gate open right now. Your son has the key, so tell him to get out here and unlock it." For a moment Michael simply stared at her, trying to process the words because he knew very well that HOA meetings were never held before sunrise. He knew officials never came at such unreasonable hours, and he wondered if Karen was simply exaggerating or trying to stage something to impress the board. But whichever it was, he knew one thing for sure. His son was not going to be dragged into this, especially after a long night of schoolwork, so with a steady tone he said, "David is asleep, Karen. He's just a boy. I'm not waking him up for this." But Karen wasn't the kind of person to listen when she had already decided what mattered, and she tapped her phone rapidly, pacing back and forth as if rehearsing lines for a performance, her frustration rising with every step, and she raised her voice again. "Do you have any idea what this means to me? I've worked for months to build trust with these officials, to prove I'm responsible enough to lead this community, and if the gate isn't open when they arrive, I'll look careless and that will ruin everything." Michael rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of both exhaustion and disbelief, because while he understood ambition, he couldn't accept her making his son part of a show, meant only for her pride, and he tried once more to calm her. "Karen, you're asking too much. Nobody comes at this hour, and even if they did, you can't expect a child to serve your plans." But her eyes flashed with stubbornness, the same look neighbors often saw when she argued about lawns being too long or decorations being out of season. And he realized she wasn't just frustrated, she was desperate. Desperate to be seen as important, desperate to secure a place of control in the HOA, and desperate enough to wake a sleeping family in the middle of the night to prove she could keep promises she had likely made without thought. Michael's heart sank not in anger but in sadness, because he saw a neighbor losing touch with reason, placing pride above peace. And as she banged on the gate once more, he could almost hear the storm of conflict forming, one that would soon involve not just him but his son too, though all David wanted was rest after his schoolwork. And in that moment Michael silently promised himself he would protect David from being caught in a struggle that never should have reached their door. But he also knew Karen wouldn't stop, not tonight, not when her reputation in front of the HOA officials was at stake. And so as the early morning air grew colder and the stars began to fade with the hint of dawn, Michael braced himself for a confrontation that he had never asked for but could no longer avoid. The sky was beginning to shift slowly from black to gray, a faint hint of morning creeping in, yet the tension at the pool gate was far from easing, because Karen remained there restless and determined, her arms folded tightly across her chest as if that posture alone could hold her together, and Michael stood opposite her, calm yet firm, unwilling to allow her demands to disturb his son any further. And while the neighborhood still slept quietly, the silence was broken only by Karen's muttering as she checked her phone again and again, each glance at the screen leaving her face more unsettled because no calls came. No messages arrived, no headlights appeared on the road, nothing to confirm the story she had been clinging to so desperately. And Michael began to wonder if deep down she already knew the truth, that no officials were ever coming, that this entire performance had been built on her own imagination or her desire to prove herself important. Yet even if she realized it, she refused to admit it, and instead she raised her chin and spoke in a sharp voice that carried too loudly in the quiet dawn. Michael, you are making a mistake. You don't see how this works. Leadership is about being ready at any moment, about showing people you are serious. And when they come and see the gate locked, they will not only question me, they will question all of us. They will think our community is lazy. And though her words were dramatic, Michael could hear the tremor in them, the way desperation had begun to sneak into her tone, so he answered in a steady voice. Karen, leadership is not about waking families at 4 a.m. Leadership is not about scaring children out of their beds. It is about respect. And right now you are showing the opposite. But instead of calming down, she stepped closer to the gate, gripping its cold metal bars with her hands, her knuckles turning pale as she said quickly, You don't understand. You've never cared about the board. You don't know how hard I've worked to be seen as responsible. How many times I've stayed up late writing emails, reminding people of the rules, keeping this place in order. And now when it's finally my turn to prove myself, you and your son are standing in my way. And hearing her words, Michael felt a wave of sadness more than anger, because it was clear that Karen had poured all her energy into something that had consumed her, and now she could not separate her own worth from the opinions of a few officials. Yet he also felt protective because her obsession was dragging his family into a storm they had not chosen, and he thought of David upstairs trying to fall back asleep, but likely still hearing fragments of Karen's loud voice through the walls, and that thought gave him strength to stay calm even as Karen's frustration rose higher. For she had started pacing again, her slippers scraping against the pavement as she whispered to herself about timing and appearances, while the gray of dawn began turning softer, a signal that soon the sun would rise, and with the light would come more witnesses. Because neighbors would step out for morning walks or to fetch newspapers, and the sight of Karen arguing at the pool gate would not go unnoticed. And perhaps that was what Karen feared most. Not the absence of officials, but the presence of neighbors who would see her out of control. And, indeed, as minutes passed, the sound of a door opening came from across the street, and out stepped Robert, an older neighbor who liked to jog early, his eyes blinking in surprise as he saw the scene before him, and he paused by his driveway, adjusting his jacket as he asked, "Everything all right here?" And Karen's head snapped toward him, her face breaking into an almost forced smile as she said quickly, Yes, everything is fine. Just preparing for the HOA visit." But her voice was shaky and unconvincing, and Robert glanced at Michael, who simply sighed and shook his head slightly, a gesture that spoke more than words. And Robert, wise enough not to interfere deeply, only nodded and began his jog, though Michael could tell from the way he looked back twice that the story would spread soon enough. And that thought made Michael uneasy, because gossip in the neighborhood traveled faster than truth. But at the same time he knew he had nothing to hide. He had done nothing wrong, and if anything it was Karen's choices that would be remembered. So he stayed silent, letting the still morning air do the talking. And after a long pause, Karen spoke again, softer now but still insistent. "Michael, please, just ask David to bring the key. Just this once, it won't hurt him, and I promise I'll make it up to him." But Michael's patience had thinned, though he kept his tone gentle. "Karen, what you don't see is that every time you put your needs above others, you hurt people even if you don't mean to, and that hurt is not something you can fix later with promises. It's about respect in the moment and right now. Respect means letting my son rest." And as his words hung in the air, Karen's face softened for the first time, her shoulders drooping slightly, as though the weight of exhaustion had finally settled on her too, and for a brief second Michael thought she might accept defeat. But then she quickly shook her head, straightened her back, and forced another smile as she said, No, they will be here, you'll see. And when they come, you'll regret standing in the way." And with that she turned her eyes back to the road, staring so intensely it was as if she could will headlights to appear, yet the street remained quiet, the horizon slowly brightening, and Michael realized the struggle was not going to end easily, because Karen's pride was too strong to let her walk away. And so he stood his ground, silent but steady, a quiet wall against her storm. While inside the house, David pressed his face into his pillow, wishing for sleep but unable to escape the faint echoes of voices below. And in that moment, Michael felt the true cost of the night. Not in arguments or reputation, but in the peace that had been stolen from a boy who simply deserved rest. And that truth settled heavily in his heart as the morning finally prepared to break open with light. The sun was finally climbing slowly above the horizon, painting the neighborhood with a soft golden light. And yet the air around the pool gate was thick with tension, as Michael stood firm on his side while Karen continued to linger restlessly on hers, her arms folded tightly against her chest. Her phone clutched like a lifeline as she kept glancing down the road with expectant eyes, convinced still that HOA officials would appear any second, even though the minutes had stretched into hours with no sign of a car, no sound of tires, no hint of visitors. And though Michael had remained calm through the long night, he felt the fatigue pressing against his body like a heavy blanket, his thoughts filled with worry for his son who had been awake on and off since the first shouting began, a boy who should have been preparing peacefully for school, but instead was caught in the middle of an unnecessary struggle between his father's patience and a neighbor's pride. And Michael wondered how much longer he could keep his tone steady, when all he wanted was to return to his home, close the door and let his family breathe in quiet again. But Karen was not ready to let go. Her determination now mixed with fear because she could feel the neighborhood waking around her. She could hear doors creaking open, and the faint sounds of neighbors stepping onto porches, voices calling good mornings across yards. And she knew her display at the pool gate was no longer hidden in the shadows of night. It was now visible to the community she had tried so hard to impress, and that realization only made her words more desperate as she turned to Michael with a strained smile, saying, "If they come now and the gate is still locked, they will think I cannot manage, they will think I am weak, and everything I worked for will be lost." And Michael looked at her with tired eyes, replying gently but firmly, "Karen, strength is not about forcing others at the wrong time. It is about knowing when to step back, when to respect people's lives, and this morning you have not shown strength. You have only shown desperation." And though his words were not cruel, they cut through the fragile mask Karen was wearing, because she flinched slightly, her smile fading, her eyes blinking rapidly as though she were holding back something she did not want to reveal. And for the first time, Michael sensed not just frustration in her, but a deep loneliness, a kind of emptiness that drove her to cling to titles and recognition, because without them she feared being invisible. And as neighbors began to notice the two of them standing by the gate, whispers started to travel from porch to porch. People curious about why Karen had been there since before dawn. People exchanging glances that carried questions they did not voice aloud. And Karen heard those whispers too, her posture stiffening as she realized the very thing she had wanted to avoid, looking foolish in front of others, was now becoming reality. Yet instead of admitting defeat, she straightened her back and tried to raise her voice again, calling out, "You'll all see the officials are on their way. They trust me to take care of this community." But the words trembled slightly, and Michael could see that even she did not believe them anymore. And while he felt frustrated at her stubbornness, he also felt a kind of pity, because it was clear that beneath her loudness was someone who simply wanted to matter, someone who perhaps had built her identity around being useful, being admired, and now that image was slipping away in the bright light of morning. And though he wanted to end the argument, he also knew that walking away too quickly might cause her to chase after him with even louder protests. So he stood silently, letting her wrestle with her own thoughts, his calmness a contrast to her restlessness, until finally the sound of a car did appear on the street, making Karen's head snap up, her face lighting with hope as she whispered, "See? I told you." But when the car drew closer, it was not officials at all, just a neighbor leaving early for work, and Karen's face fell visibly, the disappointment etched into her features as her eyes darted around nervously to see if anyone else had noticed. And indeed, a few neighbors standing near their porches had, their expressions a mix of curiosity and quiet judgment, and Michael realized that the scene was reaching its peak, that something would soon give way, because Karen could no longer hold on to the illusion that officials were coming. And sure enough, her voice broke slightly as she said, "Maybe they are late, maybe they had to change plans," but her words carried no conviction, and Michael felt a small surge of relief, because he knew this might finally be the moment she would let go, the moment she would retreat and allow the neighborhood to return to normal, though he also sensed the sadness behind her stubbornness, and for a brief second he wished he could help her see that her worth was not measured by the HOA or a locked pool gate, that she could be valued without forcing herself to be at the center of everything. But before he could speak those thoughts aloud, the door of his house opened and David stepped out, his backpack slung over his shoulder, his eyes heavy with lack of sleep but his expression calm. And he looked at Karen directly, saying in a soft but steady voice, "I'm not opening the gate, Karen, because it's not right. And I have school to go to. I need my rest and I hope you understand." And those simple words from a boy carried more power than all of Michael's careful reasoning, because they were innocent yet honest, and Karen froze, her mouth opening slightly as if she wanted to argue but finding no words, because to confront a child's truth was different from sparring with an adult. It exposed her actions more clearly than anything else. And for the first time since the long night began, Karen was silent, her phone slipping slightly in her hand as she turned her gaze to the ground, and Michael placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, guiding him toward the car so he could get to school, while Karen remained by the gate staring at nothing, lost in the weight of a night that had started with ambition but ended with exposure. And as Michael drove away with David, the quiet of the morning returned at last, leaving Karen alone with her thoughts and the soft murmurs of neighbors who had witnessed everything. And though Michael felt relief that the ordeal was over, he also felt a quiet heaviness, because he knew this was not just about a gate or officials. It was about a neighbor's deep need to be seen, a need that had led her to lose herself in the early hours of dawn. And he wondered if she would ever realize that true respect cannot be forced. It must be earned through kindness and understanding. And as the car turned the corner, the pool gate behind them stood locked and silent, a symbol not of failure, but of boundaries that needed to be kept, boundaries that protected peace even in the face of a storm. The day moved forward as the sun rose higher. Children went off to school, workers hurried to their jobs, and the neighborhood returned to its ordinary rhythm. Yet the memory of what had happened at the pool gate remained in the air like a faint echo, whispers passing from one porch to another, neighbors sharing quiet words about how Karen had stood there all night, waiting for officials who never came, her frustration spilling out until even a child's gentle refusal silenced her. And while Michael focused on his work and tried to push away the stress of the long night, he could not stop thinking about Karen, not in anger but in reflection, because he had seen something in her eyes when David spoke. Something broken, something human, and though she had annoyed and disturbed his family, he could not help but wonder if beneath all her loudness and control, she carried a loneliness that no title or HOA position could ever heal. And when he returned home later that afternoon, he noticed Karen's house across the street looked unusually quiet. Her car parked outside, but no sign of her pacing on the porch as she often did, and for a while he wondered if perhaps she was avoiding the stares of neighbors. But as the days passed, he realized that Karen had withdrawn from the usual HOA activities. Her long emails stopped, her constant reminders about rules paused, and at the next community gathering her chair was empty, causing whispers to grow louder about how she had embarrassed herself with her early morning outburst. Yet Michael felt no joy in her absence, because he knew that humiliation could be a heavy burden. And though she had been wrong to disturb his son, he also believed that no one deserved to be crushed by the weight of gossip. So one quiet evening he decided to walk over and knock gently on her door, not with anger but with the intention to speak kindly. And when she finally opened it, her eyes looked tired, her face softer without the usual mask of pride, and she said in a low voice, "I suppose you've come to remind me of how foolish I was." But Michael shook his head and replied, "No, I came to say that everyone makes mistakes. And though last week was difficult for my family, I don't want you to feel alone, Karen. Because being part of this neighborhood means helping each other, not tearing each other down." And those words seemed to surprise her more than anything else, because for the first time she stepped aside and let him in, and they sat at her kitchen table where she admitted quietly that she had been trying too hard, that after years of feeling overlooked, she thought that if she became HOA president, people would finally respect her. And she confessed that she had convinced herself the officials would come early because she wanted so badly to prove her worth. She even made up the idea in her head that they would arrive at 4 a.m., and once she said it aloud, she felt she had to follow through or else risk looking weak. And Michael listened patiently, nodding, not excusing her actions but also not judging harshly, because he understood that people sometimes trap themselves in their own pride. And when she finished, he simply said, "Respect is not about how loudly you demand it, Karen. It is about how gently you give it to others. And if you want this neighborhood to value you, then show them kindness, not control." And those words, spoken calmly, seemed to soften her even more, her eyes filling with a quiet gratitude. And from that day she began to change slowly but noticeably, starting with small acts like offering to help older neighbors with groceries, greeting children on their way to school with a smile instead of a lecture, and even apologizing to David one afternoon when he walked past her house, telling him she was sorry for waking him up, and that she hoped he did well in school. And though David only gave a polite nod, the sincerity in her tone was clear, and in time the neighbors noticed the change too, their whispers turning from gossip to cautious respect. And though she never again tried to push herself into the role of HOA president, she became part of the community in a quieter, more genuine way, one that did not demand attention but earned it naturally. And Michael watched this transformation with quiet relief, because it reminded him that even the most difficult people could change if given the chance. And it reminded him too of the power of standing firm for what was right without cruelty. For if he had given in that night, his son would have learned that boundaries could be broken for the sake of someone else's pride. But because he had stood strong yet respectful, David learned that protecting peace and showing kindness could exist side by side. And that lesson mattered more than any victory in an argument. And as weeks turned into months, the story of Karen at the pool gate faded into memory, no longer shared as a cruel joke but as a tale of how a neighbor lost her way and then found a gentler path. And though the pool gate itself remained locked during quiet nights, standing as a silent witness to that strange dawn, it also stood as a reminder that respect, once misunderstood, could eventually grow when watered with patience, and that sometimes the loudest storms ended not with a clash but with a quiet change of heart. And in the end, the neighborhood was not defined by one night of shouting, but by the small acts of understanding that followed, acts that allowed even someone like Karen, who once lost herself in ambition, to slowly discover the strength of humility, while Michael and David carried on with their lives, stronger for having faced the storm together, and calmer for knowing that even in the darkest hours before dawn, peace could be protected when one chose patience over pride. Michael stood near the pool gate with tired eyes, watching Karen pace back and forth as though she was waiting for the president himself to arrive, her phone glowing in her hand as she kept checking it every few seconds, her steps quick and restless. And he wondered how someone could put so much energy into something that made so little sense. Because even if HOA officials were coming, they would not come at a time when even birds were still asleep. Yet Karen spoke with such certainty and conviction that a part of him began to fear she had somehow managed to call them at this impossible hour. And as the seconds passed, her voice grew sharper. "Michael, do you even understand what this means for me? If they come and see the pool locked, they will think I'm careless. They will think I can't manage simple things, and then my chance at being chosen as HOA president will be ruined forever." And though Michael had little interest in HOA politics, he knew Karen craved recognition more than anything, because for months she had been trying to show the board that she was more dedicated than anyone else, often sending long emails to the community about rules, about keeping driveways clear, about trimming bushes properly, and sometimes even taking pictures of small mistakes just to prove she was paying attention. And now it seemed all of that effort had built to this one moment when she thought her image. It could shine brighter if only the pool gate was open exactly when she wanted. Yet Michael could not allow her obsession to disturb his family. So he tried once again to reason with her. "Karen, you don't need David for this. You should wait for the proper time. If you want the gate open, then ask me later today when the sun is up. But I will not wake my son right now." But Karen was not hearing him. She was too caught up in her performance, muttering to herself about the officials and how she would greet them, how she would show them the sparkling clean water and the neatly arranged chairs around the pool. And Michael suddenly realized that maybe this was not just about the gate. Maybe this was about Karen's fear of being forgotten, because she had built her whole life around proving herself, around convincing others that she was the most dependable person in the neighborhood, and perhaps in her mind, if she failed tonight, everything she had worked for would collapse. Yet to Michael it was only proof that she had lost touch with balance, that she had confused leadership with control. And as her voice grew louder, he felt his patience slipping. But before he could speak again, the sound of movement from upstairs reached him, a faint creak on the floorboards, and he knew David had woken up, likely disturbed by the knocking and shouting. And sure enough, a moment later the boy appeared at the window, his hair messy, his eyes half closed, looking down at the scene with confusion. And Karen spotted him immediately, her face lighting up as though salvation had arrived. "David!"
"There you are!"
"Come down quickly and bring the key. The officials are coming. I need you to open the pool gate," she called out, her voice almost cheerful now. But David only blinked in surprise, glancing at his father who stood firm below, and he whispered something that Michael could not hear, though he could guess his son was asking why this was happening at such an hour. So Michael raised his hand gently to signal him to stay inside, and he turned back to Karen with a voice that was calm but firm. "He's not coming down, Karen. He's a child, and this is not his responsibility." But Karen's smile faded as quickly as it had appeared, replaced with a look of panic as she pointed toward the street. "They'll be here any minute, Michael, don't you understand? This is bigger than you, bigger than David. This is about our whole neighborhood being represented well. And if the gate stays locked, they'll think we are careless people. They'll think we don't deserve good leadership." And her words carried an almost desperate weight, like someone clinging to the last rope before falling. But Michael was unmoved because he could see through the performance. He could see that she wasn't worried about the neighborhood at all. She was only worried about how the officials would see her. And the more she spoke, the more David's tired face at the window revealed sadness. Sadness that an adult would place such importance on something so small while disturbing everyone's peace. And that sadness only strengthened Michael's decision to stand firm. So he shook his head and said in a steady tone, "Karen, go home. No officials are coming at this hour. You need to rest. And when the morning comes, you can worry about your image. But tonight, my family deserves peace." But Karen was not ready to give up. She pressed her phone to her ear, pretending perhaps to make a call, saying loudly, "Yes, yes. I'm right here waiting by the gate. Everything will be ready." Though no voice could be heard on the other side, and she glanced around nervously as if hoping headlights would appear on the road to prove her right. Yet the street remained empty. The only sound, the soft hum of crickets and the faint rustle of trees in the night breeze. And Michael realized the truth was now undeniable. There were no officials coming. There was only Karen's imagination mixed with her need for importance. And though part of him wanted to end the confrontation by walking away, he knew leaving her alone in this state might only make her louder, so he stayed there, arms crossed, waiting, while David slowly closed his window to shut out the noise, and the sight of that simple action seemed to hit Michael harder than anything Karen had said, because it showed how deeply tired his son was, how unfair it was that a boy who had worked so hard for school now had to witness this strange argument in the middle of the night, and Michael promised himself he would not let it go further. Yet as the minutes stretched on, Karen's behavior grew more frantic, her pacing faster, her words tumbling one after another, and though she tried to mask it with confidence, Michael could see fear in her eyes. Fear of losing control, fear of being exposed as someone who cared more about appearances than truth. And as dawn slowly began to creep on the horizon, painting the sky with faint streaks of gray, Michael knew the situation had reached its breaking point, for soon the neighborhood would wake and others would hear the commotion, and what had begun as a demand to open a gate would become a story the entire community would whisper about for days. Yet for now, in that quiet hour before sunrise, it was only Michael, his son, and a neighbor who had lost herself in the pursuit of recognition, standing at the pool gate like a soldier guarding a post that no one had asked her to defend.